Ow! Naya head snapped back after a jounce of the carriage smacked her head against the edge of the cabin's overhead stowage. She held back her tears as she rubbed her forehead. "I don't get it," she complained. "How can we grow stronger, yet everything still hurts?" "I thought we talked about that already," Say replied. "We don't get shells or scales or even tough hides. We don't get supernatural protection like fiends, angels, undead, or elementals. We're just humans." Naya peered suspiciously out the window at the road before trying to reach for her snacks again. They were 2.5 days into their carriage ride from Lloyd's to Hoburn's, and they skipped their lunch stop in favor of making it to the capital before nightfall. Mr. Morrow was staying behind to make sure the new camps were running smoothly, and Mrs. Diaz simply ceased to function when there were too many men around, so Naya and Say went without them. "That doesn't seem very fair," Naya grumbled. "I don't know what fair has to do with anything," Say said, "but I think it's fine. We don't have any special defenses, but we also don't have any particular weaknesses. Once you factor in a decent set of equipment, it's not that big of a difference most of the time." "But demi-humans and heteromorphs can use equipment, as well," Naya noted. "Sure, but then their natural weapons and armor become pointless. Sometimes, they can't even wear crafted armor that's superior to their natural armor, especially if it's not magical." She found the bag of peppered lanka jerky she had stashed away and returned to her seat. It still didn't seem fair to her. "They are stronger, too," Naya pointed out. "Plus they get all sorts of special abilities." "That stuff's useful for the things that they do naturally," Say told her. "It usually isn't when they live in a city or something. For instance, dragons aren't going to be using their breath weapons for paperwork or anything. Plus, their crazy strength would break the quill and their claws would shred the paper." Naya tore off a piece of jerky with her teeth and sucked on it in silence. No matter how many times the bard listened to her public speaking, Say still didn't seem to understand how crucial it was to be strong. Peace and prosperity, order, justice, they were all too easy to lose without the strength to protect what one had. Thus, being strong was a requirement for everyone. Weakness was a sin that turned one into a liability, just as Naya had been a liability in the Sorcerer King's first battle with Yaldabaoth. She didn't want anyone to go through a similar experience. "I can already see the hills around Hoburn's," Naya said. "Honestly, I'm more than a bit nervous about coming back." "Why?" "Memories," Naya replied. "It's a complicated feeling." "You are not worried about what might happen due to the news?" "We don't have any idea about what might happen," Naya said. "It's hard to get worried over something you can't imagine." After the wreckage of Prince Felipe's trade fleet was discovered washing up on the northern coast, both the core leadership and their conservative allies unanimously agreed to halt their eastward advance. Not only did the fleet's destruction suggest an imminent threat to the Holy Kingdom, but they didn't know what it meant for the future course of the country. The Corps continued to construct its strongholds in the Sierra Norte, of course, but all of its other resources were dedicated to security and search and rescue operations. 2 days after that, couriers dispatched from Rimian arrived in Lloyd's, bearing the tragic news that fragments of the water god's fury, Prince Felipe's flagship, had been identified amongst the wreckage. A day later, Duke de Bonai invited Naya to join the conservatives in Hoburn's to represent Los Ganaderos, as great changes were brewing in the capital that they wouldn't want to miss out on. The carriage took an unexpected turn. Naya frowned out of the window, trying to figure out where they were heading. "We are going west for some reason," Naya said as she reached up to open the driver window. "Driver, why have we changed direction?" "The conservatives are camping west of the capital, Miss Baraha." "Camping? You'll see what I mean soon enough." He wasn't wrong. As they crested the final ridge to the city, a vast vista of tents opened up before them. The fields around Hoburn's were as packed, if not more, as the capital when it had been recaptured by the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army. There must be at least 200,000 camped outside of the walls. The nobles were clearly treating the threat behind the destruction of Prince Felipe's fleet with absolute seriousness. "There are so many people," Say said. "How many do you think are soldiers?" Naya scanned the sprawl of tents surrounding the city. If you mean trained armsmen, maybe a quarter. A gathering like this is bound to have a lot of camp followers." "A gathering like this is bound to stink," Say wrinkled her nose. "I hope they don't expect us to stay with them." "Where else can we stay?" The city's probably packed and the crown took my family's home away. I have a place in the city, Say told her. You do? Naya blinked at the unexpected response. Yeah, the bard nodded. I was using Hobans as a base to explore the surroundings from. With some luck, the people who own the building are still holding my room. I see. That's lucky for us, I guess. If Say expected her room to still be there, it probably wasn't something that a noble would bully themselves into. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, though. They had been staying at all sorts of overly pretentious places that stressed her out, so living somewhere small and cozy would be a nice change of pace. It took them about an hour to reach the highway west of the city, where their carriage came to a stop near a freshly raised camp. Naya looked worriedly at the ground, then sighed in relief when she saw that the fields had been harvested before they were trampled flat by the influx of people. Further west, the crops were still waving in the wind. At least the people managing the land here didn't waste the harvest, Naya said. Why would they? Say asked. It's valuable, isn't it? I guess I just expected the nobles to prioritize their own matters before anyone else's, Naya answered. It's something you hear about happening all the time in the city. Nobles are the rural elite, Say said. Agriculture, fishing, and forestry are what they depend on for their livelihoods. Of course they'd care about the harvest. It made sense when she put it that way. Not only had the fields been harvested in advance of the camps being set up, but the camps themselves made it look like they went to great pains to minimize damage to the land. The nearby villages were given a respectful amount of distance and the copses dotting the landscape were left untouched. Miss Baraha. A familiar voice came from one of the lanes between the tents. Naya smiled as she saw who was coming out to greet them. Lord Lugo, she nodded. Say dipped into a respectful curtsy. Naya rushed to do the same. They weren't out in the middle of nowhere anymore, so it probably wasn't proper to be so informal. She blushed as Lord Lugo chuckled in amusement. I'm glad that our messengers were able to find you, Miss Baraha, he said. Your staff can, Gem. I don't see any of your household attendants. They stayed behind to help organize things, Naya said. I didn't know people were bringing troops, either. Will that be a problem? I'll see if I can call a few over if you need them. That shouldn't be necessary, Lord Lugo replied. These armies came from the south to face the mysterious threat in the north. Your people are already positioned to do so, so it would be foolish to redeploy them. I see. Does everyone know about what happened? They do, Lord Lugo nodded. Pieces of the fleet have washed up all along the northern coast. Everyone is preparing for war with this unknown threat, and what you see around Hobans is but a part of the overall mobilization. Similar sights may be found from Rimune to Kalinshire. That was heartening to hear. At first, Naya thought that her people would take the brunt of the assault if whatever destroyed the fleet came ashore. I don't think they'll be very effective at countering this unknown threat, Say said. Prince Felipe's fleet was over 100 galleons, right? It sounds like any men you send out to fight will just get sunk like they did. We realize that much, of course, Lord Lugo replied. These forces are intended to be used in the defense of our lands along the coast. So they've given up on the sea? Naya asked. It's more as Miss Say here says, Lord Lugo answered. Challenging anything that can destroy the trade fleet in the water is a suicidal prospect. Speaking of which, have any of your vessels been attacked in recent days? Not at all, Naya replied. We've been conducting search and rescue operations ever since the wreckage first appeared. Not that we found anything aside from pieces of the fleet and its ruined cargo. Lord Lugo shook his head sadly. It must be harrowing work, he said. At least we haven't seen additional aggression from, whatever it is. Anyway, I was going to have your attendants shown to the accommodations we've prepared for you and your party. I'll call up some. About that, Naya said. Say said she might have a place in the city to stay in. Truly? Lord Lugo raised an eyebrow. That's quite fortunate. No slight intended to House Rell, but camping out in the field is hardly the glamorous visit to the capital that one might envision. Naya froze at the mention of their would-be host. House Rell, you say? Yes, that's right. Is something the matter, Miss Baraha? She silently sent her gaze past Lord Lugo, scanning the camps set up along the highway. House Rell is the royalist house that Mr. Lauser had his dealings with, Naya said. They didn't have any conclusive evidence about whether House Rell was responsible for the death of Iago Lauser, but they rationally had the strongest motives to act against him. Say speculated that the forces sent to his land were simply allies sent by proxy to avoid a direct line from being drawn to the true mastermind behind his death. I see, Lord Lugo said. Then I suppose it's for the best that you have a place to stay in the city. Out of curiosity, is the establishment you're patronizing suitable for entertaining guests? 2/3 of our meetings are being held in tents at the moment. Naya sent a questioning look at Say. It is, from a certain point of view, Say told them. I didn't lease anything like a manor, though. It's just a room. I understand. Apologies for my pretension. Before you go, I believe Lord Vigo would like to discuss several matters with you. The Count? I don't mind but, Duke de Bonai isn't here, is he? Her question was voiced in hushed tones. Lord Lugo smiled at her apprehension. I would have mentioned the Duke instead if he were present, he said, but I understand your sentiment. Duke de Bonai is quite fearsome when roused to anger. Does that mean he's still angry at me? Anger profits us little in our current situation. I assure you that you won't need to duck under flying wine glasses. Naya's eyes grew wide at the image his words painted in her mind. Are you sure about that? She asked. In response, Lord Lugo offered her his arm. Naya hesitantly allowed herself to be guided deep into the conservative camp. It was far more orderly than the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army camp that once stood in its place, and every single retainer carried themselves according to some invisible standard that was nearly tangible just from the atmosphere they created. Nearly a kilometer from the highway, they arrived at the camp's command center. Count Vigo was under a massive pavilion discussing something with several other nobles. They fell silent and rose from their seats at Lord Vigo's cue. Miss Baraha, he nodded in acknowledgement. Welcome to Hobans. You've had quite the adventure since we last spoke. Injustice should never be tolerated, Count Vigo. Naya released Lord Lugo's arm. Of course, Lord Vigo said. Given the mountain of records that Lord Lugo has provided us, it shouldn't be a problem framing your actions in those terms. That's something that can wait, however. The Holy Kingdom is focused on the destruction of the trade fleet. Any new information you have would be greatly appreciated. Lord Lugo here asked me if we've come under attack since we last spoke, which should have been just over a week ago, Lord Lugo said. Right. I left Lloyd's for Hobans 3 days ago, but, between Lord Lugo's departure and mine, our ships haven't come under attack. They've been sailing around searching for survivors non-stop. Count Vigo nodded. That's a small mercy, at least, he said. If this threat from the sea immediately moved against the coast after destroying the fleet, we'd be 3 weeks late with our response. Naya reached into the satchel slung over her shoulder, pulling out a thin binder with a few sheets of paper in it. Here's the list of the vessels we've identified from the flotsam, my lord. She placed the binder on the table between them. Unfortunately, we couldn't find any personal items to return to the families of the lost. I'm not surprised. Lord Vigo stared down at the binder, pursed his lips, and sighed. Anyone willing to destroy the fleet would have no qualms about looting all of its valuables. Have you figured out what it is? Naya asked. I was hoping you'd have some clue, Lord Vigo said. Search parties based in Rimian have only found wreckage and waterlogged cargo in the flotsam. The Royalists claim that they don't have the ships for an investigation, and they've pinned the blame for their missing galleons on the same mysterious nemesis that destroyed the trade fleet. Awkward. The Corps had taken thousands of Southern hostages and they were thinking of ransoming them back for additional funding once they were in a position to do so. Now, people thought a sea monster or something had eaten them. At least it wasn't an issue they had to immediately address. Miss Baraha, Lord Lugo asked, have your search parties noticed the same anomalies that we have? What anomalies? We've commissioned shipwrights to analyze the wreckage, Lord Vigo said. No mere storm could have destroyed the fleet so thoroughly, so that notion was immediately dismissed. After a few days, the shipwrights discovered certain patterns of damage that weren't the result of hulls being crushed and torn apart by the waves. Naya tried to recall if any of her people had mentioned something similar. For the most part, the debris was being salvaged and repurposed. The only thing that they preserved were fragments that could be identified as being from one vessel or another so they could report the loss. What kind of damage was it, my lord? Naya asked. Clean damage, Lord Vigo answered. Cuts. Punctures. Someone purposely sunk the fleet by inflicting damage to the ship's hulls. A glum look filled Naya's face. That was exactly why the Holy Kingdom couldn't fight their aquatic neighbors. They could sail a galleon filled with their most powerful champions, and a single merfolk hunter could open a hole in the bottom of their ship. A tribe of aquatic demi-humans could sink a fleet with little effort and no losses. Land-dwelling races who wished to rely on the bounty of the sea and the prosperity of waterborne trade did so by the grace of the aquatic peoples that dwelt in the world's oceans, lakes, and rivers. Has anyone claimed responsibility for the attack? Not as far as we know, Lord Vigo said. The Royalists have undoubtedly made the same findings, however. Everyone rightly assumes that we have an unknown enemy lurking beyond our northern coast. What about our neighbors? Has anyone asked them? Ransuin has gathered a delegation to speak with the coastal tribes and kingdoms. That will be a very long process, however. We can't expect him to return with his findings anytime soon. Naya had met the Green of Roble's 9 colors on 2 separate occasions. The first was on a beach at the Summer Palace during the Wind of Rimune, where her father had introduced Naya and her mother to him. The other time was during the victory celebrations after the war. Ransuin had spent most of the war collaborating with Enrique Bells of the Royal Marines and the Holy Kingdom's southern armies, which were commanded by Marquis Bodopo. Together, they successfully managed to defend the isthmus connecting the northern and southern halves of Roble and eventually defeated Yaldabaoth's southern offensive. After that, they joined forces with the north to form the Holy Kingdom Liberation Army. What about the Sea Dragons? Naya asked. They wouldn't tolerate an attack like this in their territorial waters. Ransuin notified us that they haven't been seen for some time now. Her mouth fell open, aghast. Not only were sea dragons extraordinarily powerful, but they were wise and generally benevolent beings. It was unthinkable for anyone who lived in or drew their livelihood from their domains to attack them. I see, Naya said. In that case, I don't think I have anything further to contribute for now. We couldn't find a single survivor cast adrift. Just the fact that we haven't suffered any further attacks is enough to give us some peace of mind, Miss Baraha. Thank you for sharing what you know. It's the least I could do, Naya nodded. By the way, when will the Duke be arriving? Ho! A gleam appeared in the Count's eye. So you're looking forward to that tongue-lashing? I am not. Naya shrunk back. Well, your entire strategy revolved around supporting Prince Felipe's bid for the throne, right? What will you do now? Lord Vigo exchanged a long look with his fellow conservatives. That would depend on how things develop, Miss Baraha, he said. The situation as a whole has changed drastically, even without this unknown threat. Half of the Crown's revenues come from the trade fleet, and I'm fairly certain that the Royalists were intent on using all of that gold they sucked out of the cities to buy them out. As a whole, the Holy Kingdom is in dire economic straits, and the Royalists have ultimately inflicted suffering upon the people to no good end. I do not doubt that whatever miracle they were trying to fool the people with lies stillborn with all of their other aspirations. Miracle? And what was that about buying out the trade fleet? The Count made it sound like it was a self-evident thing, and the nobles around him showed no surprise at the statement. Even a commoner like her understood that it wasn't a good thing to be seen as ignorant in the politics of the capital, however, so she decided to press on. But you must have some idea of your direction from this point onward, Naya said. As I said, Miss Baraha, it depends on how the situation develops. Currently, it's so foggy that I can't in good conscience promise that we'll embark on any particular course. Once the winds of the capital start blowing, we'll have a clearer idea of our heading. And how long will that take, my lord? Not long. The royal court should make a statement within a few days. Things will happen quickly after that. What if we come under attack from whatever destroyed Prince Felipe's fleet? Then everyone will be forced to move, and things like court politics will fall by the wayside. Naya supposed it couldn't be helped. At least it would give her time to digest what was going on in the capital. She would have to learn the important stuff quickly if she wanted to find the best way forward for her people. After exchanging some pleasantries with the assembled nobles, Naya left the camp with Say at her side. When they went to board their carriage for their trip to the city, however, the driver informed them that Hobans was so crowded that all non-essential vehicles had been barred from entering. It was only a few kilometers to Rimyan Gate, so they shouldered their baggage and went on foot. What do you think of what Lord Lugo said? Naya asked as they walked along. What do you mean? I didn't like that vagueness when I asked him about what they're going to do now. Oh, the bard replied. That. It should be expected, right? How so? They're nobles, Say told her. Maybe it's just force of habit with the way the Holy Kingdom is now, but nobles usually always wait for the king to act first when it comes to major moves. Why? Say remained silent while they passed the entrance to another camp. It belonged to a group of minor houses, so it seemed that they had set up in order of arrival rather than precedence. Because anything they say before the royal court makes a related statement can be cancelled out by that statement, Say said once they had passed the sentries. Say you're a noble who adopted a new farming technique that's highly successful. You announce to all of your tenants that you plan on taking the fief's increased revenues to increase military spending by 10%, pave all the main roads and fix up a few bridges over the winter. Now everyone's happy because there's increased security and moving things around has become easier. I don't see a problem with that, Naya said. The problem comes after. That same winter, your liege sees the improved revenues and decides that he wants to make some improvements too. So he raises a special tax for it. Suddenly, all that stuff you promised to your people can't happen because the new tax took the money away. Ugh! Naya cried, that's terrible. I'm going to get a stomachache just thinking about facing all those people I promised stuff to. Yeah, well, nobles are people too. Worse than that, everything they say tends to be bound to one expectation or the other. Just suggesting things can result in angry people who expect something out of it, and you're potentially an angry person with an army. I can't see our nobles accepting something like your example, though, Naya said. That's why I figured it was just force of habit, Say replied. And the Holy King could still push annoying stuff through with royalist support. The way kingdoms are set up, there's almost always someone above you who can negate whatever you're trying to do, so it's better to just wait for the people on top to make their moves first. Everyone operates within the constraints imposed upon them. I guess that's part of the trap we're stuck in. Even though twilight was already fading, they still had to line up to get into Rimian Gate. Naya did her best not to glare at the House Rell retainers, or look at them at all, out of fear that she might get herself barred from the city. Finally making it into the city didn't improve the crowded conditions. This is the Western Quarter, Naya complained. Why is it so busy? The Western Quarter was one of the industrial quarters, so there shouldn't have been anything interesting for visitors to the area. Naya did her best to follow Say, who had a much easier time slipping through the press of men than she did. She was so focused on keeping up with the bard that she didn't realize they had entered the water gardens until they were bathed in its lurid lighting. Wait a minute, Naya said. Wait. Her voice drew the gazes of dozens of men, so she quieted down and did her best not to attract further notice. Say eventually stopped inside a suspicious-looking alley. Naya turned to look everywhere worriedly as the bard spoke with an unseen individual on the other side of a dimly lit door. This is the place you leased a room from? Naya asked once the bard turned back around. Yeah. But it's in the water gardens. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with it? It's... Naya shut her mouth and took a step back as the door opened. To her great horror, the devil that had approached her before emerged from the anonymous portal. Hey, Orlando, Say said. Why, if it isn't Say? The man smiled. I was wondering where you disappeared to. Did you get the liquor I found you? Indeed we did, Sir Orlando nodded. We managed to secure several supply contracts with the people you sent over. You're a real lifesaver. Great, Say smiled. We just came in from a long trip, so could I get the keys to my room? Oh, and do you mind if my friend stays with me? Not at all, Sir Orlando turned his criminally handsome face toward Naya. You are most welcome here, Isn't that one of our masks? One of their masks? A whole 3 seconds passed before Naya spun around and looked up. There, hung the sign of the Queen of Thorns, with its image of Queen Calca in a tight leather outfit and a domino mask. Naya's hand came up to snatch the mask off of her face and cast it to the ground. AHH. She stomped on the thing repeatedly with her boot. Ah. That's it. Sir Orlando smiled broadly, the sheer disdain, that expression of absolute disgust. I knew I wasn't wrong. I take it that you've reconsidered my offer, miss? We're busier than ever these days. You should have taken Orlando up on his offer. Are you crazy? Naya shot Say a look. Why would I want to work in a brothel? It's not just a brothel, Say told her. All of the people here work different jobs. Prostitution is entirely optional. Sir Orlando is so busy with all the people in Hobans now that he'll take any help they can get. Not that he wouldn't have hired you anyway. And I bet you do great in the casino. The casino? Naya frowned. What makes you say that? You're a Baraha, right? Naya stared wordlessly at the bard for several moments. Just because my name is Baraha doesn't mean I belong in a casino. Why would you even think that? Because surnames originally come from the family's profession. Well, my father was a ranger, Naya told her. And my grandfather was. Actually, I don't know what he was, but my point is that people should be free to choose what they want to do with their lives. There's no rule in the Holy Kingdom that forces you to work as whatever your name says you are. Maybe there should be, Say muttered. The bard wasn't making any sense whatsoever. How about becoming the strongest casino employee ever? Say asked after a moment. You always talk about becoming strong, right? Naya rose to her feet and left Say's room. What was the point of that? It wasn't as if casino workers had any impact on the fate of nations. She made her way to the ground floor of the Queen of Thorns and poked her head out of the employee entrance. The alleyway was empty, but the streets were crowded even during the early hours. Where are you going? Say's voice came from behind her. Out, Naya replied. I want to see how the city is doing. I need to get a new mask, too. The old mask looked great on you, Say said. I don't see what your problem with it was. Naya left the alley and slipped into the crowded street. Their sensibilities were too different, so arguing about the topic felt pointless. Why do you hate them? Her steps stopped in front of the district's central canal. I don't hate them, Naya said. Everything you say and do tells me otherwise, Say told her. You won't even make eye contact with any of the employees. It's like they're unworthy of your attention. What makes the people of the Water Gardens any less deserving of your attention? Naya glowered at the crystal-clear water of the canal. Why did she have to spell out something so obvious? While they stood there, a drunken man staggered in their direction. Naya turned and hurriedly walked away. Does that mean you hate me, too? Say asked. I've worked here and in plenty of other places like this, as well. I don't hate you, Naya answered. I just find it sad that you had to do what you did. You don't sell yourself anymore, right? Everyone sells themselves in some way, Say told her. People who can't sell their skills end up selling their bodies. Some people have strong bodies and can become laborers. Others have beauty and sell that instead. I was happy that I could help my family with what I had, not sad. How could you be happy about that? Naya said, it's a horrible thing to have happen to anyone, never mind a kid. More horrible than starving to death? I don't understand how you people consider being a laborer honest work, but people like the ones working in the Queen of Thorns are somehow illicit. Because it's immoral, Naya replied. They are doing nothing but hurting themselves and other people. Gambling, alcohol, prostitution, and all that other stuff leads to debauchery. Then why isn't it illegal in the Holy Kingdom? Why is there a whole district for it in the capital? There are a lot of things that shouldn't exist, Naya said. The water district is supposed to be filled with industries associated with the water god, but Hobans isn't on the coast. All of the stuff you'd normally find in Rimian or Lloyd's can't exist here, so it got overrun with everything else instead. In addition to what one might expect of a water god, the water god of the four great gods also oversaw the domains of nobility, healing, and charm. Over time, various interpretations of what that meant transformed the water district into the Water Gardens, a nest of decadence and wickedness that catered to the elite. Of course, the elite prevented any change to what they desired, and this sentiment was especially strong in the capital where people of power gathered. So if it was up to you, Say said, you'd destroy the Water Gardens? I'd replace it with something more useful, at least, Naya replied. Like what? Something that isn't harmful. If they want stuff that fits the theme of the water district, they can have fancy inns and artistic venues. You know, pretty much every town and city that I've been to has brothels, pubs, and all that. Not having places like the Water Gardens doesn't stop people from doing all of that stuff you don't like. Our justice camps will fix that, Naya said. Anyone who wants to grow stronger doing productive things is welcome. There won't be any need for people to do stuff like that anymore. What if that's what they want? Don't be silly. Why would anyone want to work in a place like this? Say just kept saying increasingly crazy things. Was she just trying to be difficult? I guess whether something is considered honest work or not depends on where you are, the bard sighed. Well, it's not honest work here, Naya said. And I think that's a good thing. The rest of the world has all sorts of weird ideas that shouldn't take hold in Robley. After what seemed like far too long, they finally entered the Earth District on the east side of the city. Naya took a deep breath after they crossed over, glad she was out of the suffocating atmosphere of the water gardens. The difference between the two districts was jarring, however, with the water gardens being far better maintained due to its aristocratic patronage. Bleh, Say said. There are too many people here. It can't be helped, Naya said. The population of the city must have quadrupled in 2 weeks. The population of the city and its surroundings, at least. It looked like the labor camp strangling Hobans had utterly lost their handle on things. There was no way for them to deal with the sudden demand for everything, and visiting retainers flooded the streets. The locals didn't hesitate to take advantage of the unexpected windfall, rushing about and doing their best to make as many sales as they could. This isn't going to last long, Say said. Why? Naya asked. The nobles still control imports, right? I bet all these people are using up the last of the industrial supplies that they have. No matter how much money they make, they won't be able to buy more. Won't that hurt the nobles, too? Probably not, Say said. It's not as if they aren't supplying their men. The ones you see here are just buying extra stuff. Luxuries and souvenirs, probably. They likely aren't very impressed, even though it's the first time to the capital for most of them. Why does it seem that everything the royalists do only hurts the north? Well, this part isn't on purpose, at least. Both the citizens and the retainers are just doing what people do. Even so, it would lead to an even more desperate situation. The royalists would be sitting secure and well supplied in their camps, while Hobans became even more of a hollowed-out shell than it was before. It was pretty much a siege that no one recognized as one. She watched the emaciated residents interacting with their customers from the south. Couldn't the southerners see that the people were suffering? Surely they noticed the poor condition they were in compared to themselves. I should speak to the people, Naya said. I don't think anyone will notice you in this mess, Say replied. The nobles probably won't like your message, either. The conservatives don't seem to mind. I'm sure they already mind, the bard told her. They just have bigger fish to fry at the moment, and you're on their side. The notion was something that she had been harboring in the corner of her mind for some time, but she wasn't sure if it was the case or not until they started confronting the royalists. In the Holy Kingdom, the crown, temples, and aristocratic establishment were used to being the only ones with access to meaningful power. The path of justice encouraged everyone to cultivate their personal strength so that they might uphold their own justice, and that naturally infringed on what the elites of the Holy Kingdom considered their exclusive domain. Naya wanted to be able to change the Holy Kingdom via peaceful means, but whether that was possible was yet to be seen. After witnessing the militancy of the nobles and their willingness to employ force to get their way, that hope had become a rapidly dwindling one. There must be somewhere I can go that the nobles won't notice, she said. There probably is, Say replied. The bard looked up at the shop houses lining the street. After a moment, she made her way across the district. What are you looking for? Naya asked. A courtyard, Say answered. There shouldn't be any visitors in the city going into the back alleys. People on the streets won't be able to hear you, either. Say veered into an alley. Naya hesitated for a moment at its shadowed entrance before running to catch up with the bard. She looked about warily as they made their way deeper down the narrow passage. After several twists and turns, they emerged into a small courtyard roughly 10 meters to a side. There was a bit of grass in the middle, and a few skinny fruit trees stretched their branches to the sky. I don't see anyone. It's not like they'd be waiting for you, Say said. All the kids and housewives that aren't helping with the shops should be in their homes. Who knows, there might be some core members around. That would be a great help if it were the case. She had never spoken to crowds without at least a handful of followers around. Before that, she would just talk to individuals around a campfire during meals or while drilling with the Liberation Army's soldiers. A figure appeared in the shadow of a doorway. Maybe she could start small after all. Excuse me, Naya put on her best smile, do you know about our savior, Einzul? You are. The child screamed in fright and ran away. Naya felt tears welling in her eyes. You need a mask, Say said. I'm not that scary, am I? Say didn't answer. Somehow, that hurt her even more than if she had confirmed it. A woman's soothing voice issued from the empty doorway, followed by her fearful call. Papa, there's a monster in the back. Naya and Say made themselves scarce, not wanting to see what came out. Where are you going now? Say asked. Getting a mask, Naya answered. They crossed the street outside the alley and entered a tailor's shop. Welcome, the man at the front counter said. I apologize in advance for our limited selection. How may I help you? Hello, Naya said, I'm looking for a... The man waited patiently as she tried to find words for what she wanted. If she asked for a mask, the shopkeeper would probably offer her the sort that laborers use to keep from breathing in dust. Would a strip of cloth be fine? She wasn't sure if she would be able to see through it. Do you have something like a veil? Naya asked. A veil? The man looked her up and down. For what occasion might this be for, young miss? Why do I feel like everyone is attacking me? Naya wanted to think that she had grown numb to people singling her out over her eyes, but something always happened to prove her wrong. Do you have one, or don't you? Just a moment. She stared absently at the empty shelves of the shop, stewing over her treatment. The man returned several minutes later, bearing a crate filled with cloth scraps. Naya examined the offerings with a dubious eye, fishing out the longest pieces she could find. How much for these? 1 silver apiece, the shopkeeper answered. 1. Ridiculous. It was a wonder that the citizens didn't get beaten up by their southern customers for such absurd prices. In the end, she settled on a strip of tanned cloth about as wide as her hand. After leaving the shop and entering a different alley from before, Naya wrapped it over her eyes. I can't see anything. Obviously, Say said. Naya drew her dagger and cut eye holes into the cloth. They didn't stay open when she put it back on, however. Now you look like an especially unfortunate bandit, Say noted. You should have stuck with the mask I gave you. Never. I can make this work. 15 minutes later, she managed to come up with something workable. They went to a back alley in another part of the district to try again. Just before she entered another, similar courtyard, she nearly bumped into a nondescript man carrying a stack of crates out the back of one of the workshops. Oh? The man peeked around the boxes. If it isn't Miss Baraha. I haven't seen you around the city for a while. Does it even matter what kind of mask I'm wearing? She waved away the thought and greeted the man with a nod. I've been out of the city, she said. I'm sorry for not being able to recall your name, but... Abrigo, the man told her. Paul Abrigo. My boys and I joined around the time the army took part. It's nice to see you again, Mr. Abrigo, Naya said. A lot of things have happened since I was last in Hobans. That's a bit of an understatement, Miss Baraha. It feels like the damn war all over again. Actually, I may prefer the demi-humans from back then to our new customers. What have they been doing? Plenty. Crowding the city, walking around like they own the place. Picking through our shops in their gangs while complaining about the prices. The gods know it's hard enough for us to get by without all that thrown in. Actually, maybe there's something you can explain to me. What is it? Naya asked. The fact that they're complaining about the prices at all, Mr. Abrigo said. I know they're from the country where stuff's cheaper, but their reaction about prices in the city seem more than a bit off. Ah, about that, the newcomers are surprised because things are only that expensive in the towns and cities of the Northern Holy Kingdom. Actually, it's not even all of the north, just the lands managed by the royalist houses. Several people from the shop houses nearby poked their gaunt faces out of the doors and windows surrounding the alley, drawn by the conversation. Naya pondered her unexpected audience. Going by the reactions of the people along the northern coast, she wasn't sure if it was a good idea to disclose everything she knew. The last thing she wanted was to create a mob of angry citizens while Hobans was surrounded by an army. So those rumors from the western districts were true? A housewife in one of the windows above her asked. What did you hear? Naya looked up at her. That they've been getting things cheaper than the rest of the city. It's sort of confusing, though. They use some special coin that's good for one of the camps outside. Some other people say that it's just a trick by the nobles to get the people to side with them. Is there any evidence of those rumors? Naya asked. Have people actually gotten things from the labor camps? Seems like it, the housewife said. Sometimes, a trickle comes through to us from friends and such. The houses in the other districts keep an eye out for it, though. They treat it like smuggling. What did that mean? As far as Naya knew, the royalists all did the same thing everywhere and Hobans was surrounded by royalists. Why would that behavior have changed? Could you tell me which houses are doing this? Just one. House Rell. House Rell, again? She seemed fated to bump into them one way or another. Was that why the conservatives were camping on House Rell's side of the wall? An uneasy feeling filled her at the prospect of her allies joining hands with the ones that had killed Mr. Lauser. What would she do if that was the case? There was no way she or her people could accept it. I'd like to see this for myself, Naya said. Say, do you think it's possible? You know, we walked right through their jurisdiction on the way to the watergar. Naya clapped her hand over the bard's mouth. The bystanders gave her curious looks. Mr. Abrigo, Naya said, do you think any of your neighbors would like to hear about the Sorcerer King's wisdom? I'm not sure if it's a question about liking it or not, the man replied. It's the plain truth, isn't it? You're right, she nodded. I suppose I was just asking whether there'd be people here to listen to me speak today. In the evening, Mr. Abrigo told her. After dinner. We always have a dozen or so people in the courtyard here chatting or whatnot. Great, Naya grinned. I'll be back this evening, then. Oh, if you know any members of the Sorcerer King Rescue Corps in the city who would like to attend, please feel free to contact them. That applies to anyone you think should come, I guess. Mr. Abrigo set his crates down along the wall of his workshop and dusted off his hands. I'll be glad to tell them, he said. You make it sound as if there are people who shouldn't come, though. For now, Naya replied, I'd like to keep it to the residents of the city. Don't bring any of the nobles or their men. With the way things are right now, that will only cause trouble. They parted ways and left the back alleys, stopping at the edge of the crowded street. It was still mid-morning, so there was plenty of time to investigate the claims about House Rell. After noting the location of the alley, Naya joined the flow of traffic southwest around the city. Say, Naya asked, did you notice anything odd about the western districts last night? You were right there with me. It was so crowded. I was preoccupied with all of the retainers in the street, so I didn't get a good look at the district itself. The residents that I did see looked better fed than the ones here, Say told her. They said House Rell is up to something, but it could be anything at all. I bet it is something to do with the conservatives, Naya said. At first, I thought the conservatives were there because their territories are west of Hobans, too. With what we've seen and heard, though, do you think they're jumping ship to join the conservatives? It would explain the change in their behavior when it came to controlling Hobans. Though what they considered an appropriate response differed from what Naya and her followers advocated, the conservatives didn't like what the royalists were doing in the north any more than she did. House Rell would be required to clean up its act if it was to join the Duke's faction. If that's true, Say said, then they must have been making arrangements for a long time. Why do you say that? Because of what I said before. The residents in the western quarter are closer in condition to the people working in the water gardens than they are to the ones in the other common areas of the city. People who have been starving for a long time don't just suddenly recover overnight. It takes months to go back to normal. That was true. She had come across many starving people during and after the war. Weeks of care only got them back to the point where they wouldn't die. It took much longer for them to regain their weight and return to normal functioning. Most of Hoban's citizens weren't on the verge of death, but they were clearly malnourished. What one could afford to eat simply wasn't enough for a working individual. Do you think the conservatives would do that? Naya said as they stopped to let a patrol of armsmen pass, invite the enemy of one of their allies to join them. I wonder if they see it that way, Say said. Nobles are used to dealing with different people in different situations. When it comes to other nobles, they usually have to put up with them for their entire lives, enemy or not. If the situation calls for cooperation, then they'll do what they can to make things work. Never mind nobles, life is full of unsatisfactory compromises for most people. But they're murderers, Naya scowled. House Rell needs to be brought to justice. You got that right, woman. Naya started as a man joined their discussion. She backed away slightly at the sight of a royalist patrol behind him. Whoa, there, the man said in calming tones. We're not here to hurt you. Just overheard what you said. Are you saying that House Rell is doing that stuff here, too? Say asked. Too? Are you saying that they've killed people elsewhere? Say nodded silently, staring up at the patrol sergeant with wide, fearful eyes. The man sighed and shook his head. I shouldn't be surprised after what they've done in the city. Shouldn't the Holy Order have done something about them? Naya asked. Oh, they've tried, the man replied, but Restello's a slippery lord with slippery followers. They've been terrifying the city for months and no one's been able to bring them down. But there are so many armsmen in Hobans now, Say said. We should be safe now, right? The man shook his head. I'm sorry to say that isn't the case. They've changed a lot since they started acting out of sorts. It's gotten so bad now that they have a swarm of rogues stalking their jurisdiction at night. Are rogues? Yeah. That isn't even the worst of it. Restello's got a demon working for him. I'm pretty sure the Holy Order would have done something about that, Naya said. The Holy Order's full of idiots, the patrol sergeant said. They won't do anything until it's already too late. Even caught him once and let him go because they couldn't prove he was guilty, so he's not actually a demon? He may as well be a demon wearing a human face. Brazen as anything, too, smiling down on the streets in plain view. They say he's an Ijanio assassin hired by Lord Restello to do his dirty work, but the taint of his evil is spreading, I tell you. Naya paled. When did this assassin show up in the city? The patrol sergeant looked at his men. Around the beginning of last month? Somewhere around there, maybe a bit before. Naya went cold as the patrol agreed on a rough date. It was about the same time that Hacienda Santiago had been raided and Iago Lauza and his closest men had been killed. I see, she said. Thank you for letting me know. She returned up the street, heading back the way she came. Where are you going? Say asked after she caught up with her. Back to the water gardens, Naya replied. I need to get my bow.